on the topic. Certainly to drop any questions that you might have in the chat. And just a kind of a quick comment on, the work from home situation that we're all in. We're actually getting our air conditioner replaced today, which of course is always fun. So I spent 15 minutes getting set up on the front porch in advance of this discussion, only to have my neighbor's landscaping crew show up about 5 minutes before we got started. So here I am in my living room. I expect that you'll hear my children at some point running through, which is the way of the world these days. So as Michael said, I know this has been a challenging time for everybody, both professionally and personally. So I hope whatever unique situation you're in, that you're healthy and safe and doing well. Again, look forward to talking with you on the topic of operational resilience today. I'll let my colleague Dugan Krawitz introduce himself as well.
Great. Thank you, Andy, and good morning, everybody. Dugan Krawitz. I'm an associate director down here in Dallas with Protiviti. I am a massive Chicago Cubs fan. I know that's only going to satisfy half of this group. I get that. But I want to be known. So when I do stumble, when I do say the wrong words, just remember I'm a big Cubby fan, going all the way back to the Penguin on the hot corner. So been in business continuity and crisis management, IT disaster recovery for about 15 years now, as both consulting and as an owner of an enterprise program, a global program. So much of the insight I'll be bringing to this conversation will be not only the compliance and regulatory basis of operational resilience, but also how this compares and sort of how this extends and enhances business continuity practices that you and your teams may be very familiar with. So with that, Andy, back to you. Andy, are you there? I believe you're on mute, sir.
Thanks. Sorry, Dugan. Why don't we move on to slide 4 here, for those of you that don't have the Teams chat in front of you and are reading along with the PDF file that Philip sent along, and just talk about really some recent news in terms of Travelex. This had to do with an outage that occurred in early this year, which seems like about 3 years ago in January, with Travelex. The currency exchange firm was exposed to a ransomware attack, and you can see just the significant impact. And these are the types of incidents that really have gotten the regulators' attention over the past few years. And when you think about operational resilience, it really is the ability of both organizations throughout the financial sector and the sector overall to withstand what they often refer to as these extreme but plausible scenarios, right? Those tail risks that don't occur often, but when they do, have a significant impact on, or have the potential to significantly impact, business services of our large financial institutions that support the global economy. And it's certainly interesting timing to have this discussion. I think as we throughout the past couple of years, we're meeting with many of the largest financial institutions to discuss the topic. It was primarily a theoretical discussion for most organizations. Well, that's changed over the past 5 or 6 months, where we've seen kind of a real life, extreme but plausible scenario play out on the global stage. And we'll talk a little bit about, COVID and how that impacted the industry, how the industry responded, and how that does and does not kind of reflect the broader discussion on operational resilience. So why don't we move to the next slide here and talk a little bit more. Actually, we're going to pause for a polling slide. So if you could open your browser, and Philip or Allie, maybe you can help walk me through the process, because my screen is frozen here on the polling exercise.
Yes, no worries. So if everybody will open their browser to the pollev.com/Protiviti URL, It's going to prompt you for your first and your last name. Once you enter those in, if you leave that screen open, it will not prompt you again. The window that you have open now will automatically populate as we progress through this presentation for each new polling question. So just please make sure when you see the polling question come up, you submit your answer and we'll be able to see everybody's on our screen. And Jordan, if you want to go ahead and proceed to the next slide.
So it looks like this is Dugan, everybody. It looks like we could have gone almost binary with this. We've got, are you familiar with operational resilience? And the vast majority of this group has answered yes. I think that makes sense. And then just one or two people responding that this is the first true intro to the topic. So looks like we have a sizable response here, Andy.
Great. Thanks for that. Of course, my browser is not working, and neither is Teams. So I feel like I'm driving without seeing the road here. So feel free to jump in and help me out as we talk through these slides. But that's great. I think a common understanding is helpful for this discussion. And frankly, we do a lot of these exercises. It's been very interesting to see how the awareness has changed and evolved just since 2018. In terms of the familiarity and focus on the topic. This has just, become a very significant focus for the regulators. And if we go to the next slide, Jordan, on the operational resilience background, hopefully we're there on Teams. I'll talk a little bit about kind of the reason for the focus over time. And primarily this has been driven, at least initially, through the EU and UK. There were some very notable outages you'll see on this slide in 2017 and 2018. Probably the most notable one was the Maersk incident, which is not financial services, but had a significant impact in kind of the global shipping operations of one of the largest companies in the world. In terms of shipping. So that was a significant impact. Visa outages in 2018 also got a lot of attention. So what we saw in June of 2019 was, 2018, was the Bank of England, PRA, and FCA jointly publishing their first discussion paper on the topic of operational resilience, really kind of highlighting the need for sector-wide focus on the topic, and kind of clearly laying out that the firms within the sector should expect regulations on the topic in the coming years. And Protiviti actually had a kind of an interesting position throughout the discussion within 2019. We assisted the SIFMA, the Global Markets Association, in really helping craft and understand the sector-wide views and response on operational resilience, with the intent, as firms were looking forward to these regulations, not just in the UK but globally, of kind of getting to a set of regulations that made sense and that really hit the intent, which is to make sure that these firms could individually and as a sector support business services in the case of these extreme but plausible scenarios. That was, I think, built on in December of 2019, December of last year. Again, there was jointly, the UK regulators published a set of consultation papers, those built on the discussion paper from the prior year, and really laid out the specific guidance that the regulators are expecting across the industry. Now, the original date for feedback on the consultation papers was April of this year. Obviously, Obviously, like a lot of things, there have been delays due to the global pandemic and the effects of that. The revised date has been set as October of this year for the UK regulators, and we can talk a little bit about the global regulatory landscape as well as we move on. So Jordan, why don't we go to the next slide here, and maybe I'll ask Dugan to talk through just a little bit more about what operational resilience means and how that might differ from some of the programs already in place at large financial institutions in terms of disaster recovery and business continuity.
Absolutely. So I joined Andy and the operational resilience team about a year ago as that business continuity sort of mindset. And one of the first questions I've asked then, and fortunately, it's a common question that's asked even now, is how is this different? And my primary go-to initial response is it depends on where you sit. So I'm going to speak to the slide here, which is not recommended, but I'm going to anyway. So if you look at the rings to the left, operations in the middle of those concentric circles, the systems, RTO, RPO, this is what we're most familiar with, right? So place yourself in the middle of the organization. We think about our processes, our third parties, our technology, and what those things, why they're priority. So understanding the disruption impacts, and based on that understanding, assigning priority, and based on the priority, kind of get into the rigorous planning process and BCM process. If you take a step, look at the blue concentric circle, we then add sort of what I just mentioned, some of the business processes, understanding a broader enterprise risk tolerance, the business continuity management sort of functions, and all of those factors within an enterprise program. And of course, today's day and age, cybersecurity threats are ubiquitous, so we can't get away from that. And then the final circle, the outermost circle, is sort of where the primary difference is with OpRes. We're building on what's already there, but we're placing ourselves now outside the concentric circle and looking outside in. And we want to understand some key attributes of that perspective. First and foremost is understanding the impact tolerance to the macro economy and to the segment, or the sector, excuse me. And that's difficult to do from inside the organization. So we want to take a look at that and understand it. To do that, though, from the outside, we don't want to look at business processes distinctly and sort of minutely. We want to look at what we're calling and what the regulations are calling important business services. And this is that front to back understanding of all of the business processes. So for those of you that are familiar with the BIA type of process, this might sound familiar. At the same time, though, the operational resilience language is putting a lot more rigor and an added layer of that attention on concepts that might already be in place. Next slide, please. So as we go into an understanding of how to approach this, again, let's build off of what many of you are likely familiar with. So identifying those IBSs. It's not uncommon for a large organization to have several hundred business processes, maybe even thousands, depending on how large and how complex you may be, and depending on what you define as a process, right? But at the same time, from this operational resilience parlance, we don't want to concentrate on just processes. We want to concentrate on that IBS, and everything sort of builds from there. In the same way that the BIA foundates or provides a foundation for business continuity, the IBS identification is going to establish the effectiveness of your operational resilience program. So understanding that full front to back mapping, and I'm going down into number 2 here, understanding that full front to back mapping, which could be a couple of hundred processes in and of a single important business service. That's important. Because then we get into the 3 and 4 and 5 where we want to understand how we're going to test it. What's tolerance? What's economic impact to the primary sector? Are we in alignment with some of the compliance language with regards to establishing that impact tolerance as we do as individual firms? Number 4, it takes nobody here by surprise. The difference here, though, is simply that it's the scale is so much larger. So again, that governance needs to adopt to the scale. One of the big differences in OPRES language, and we'll go into this in a few slides as well, is the testing and the continuing to evolve. So the testing here is integrated testing, and we talk about that a lot in business continuity. We talk about even more in the financial services side of a business continuity discussion. But at the same time, it still is not as pervasive as you think it should be, right? We talk about a server, we talk about technology stack, maybe a process or function or department, but do we really bring in a full understanding within the same test and the same simulation of how those plans are documented and how those teams are kept aware of what they need? Another big piece is at number 7 here, the conduct self-assessment. We do have opportunities to measure ourselves. Again, it's not a new concept, but with regards to the new perspective, the important business services, and the scale and rigor that goes along with that self-assessment could be really valuable.
And Dugan, just maybe one additional comment. You kind of see these key areas of focus, these 7 areas on slide 9. That the primary driver for these is the consultation papers from the UK, with an expectation that, generally speaking, these will become the key regulatory obligations for firms operating in the UK. Now, what we have seen and heard is that the Fed here in the States and the OCC, MAS in Singapore, and others around the world will be adopting not the same but similar requirements as what you see here. And there may be a couple that we'll speak to more specifically where the guidance and regulatory requirements might differ. But I think generally speaking, there's an understanding that these are the key points that should be included and addressed within your operational resilience program in order to demonstrate that you are taking this topic seriously.
Thanks, Andy. So let's move to slide 10, please. And slide 10 is a visual that allows us to sort of encapsulate everything that Protiviti represents as an OPRES framework. So a lot of this is going to be familiar, so I'm going to focus on the deltas. So looking at the governance layer, the governance swim lane there at the top, the items that strike me as being net new to this conversation is the enterprise orchestration and the sector coordination. So again, within processes and practices that may already be intact and mature within your organizations, this enterprise orchestration may mean different things. However, within the OPRES conversation, we recommend that orchestration goes all the way through the life cycle. And we try as anything to get these silo walls knocked down as much as possible. Easier said than done. We all deal with it somehow, some way. But that orchestration is really large with regards to that regulatory guidance. And then the sector coordination is big in my mind. And I hone in on this one because, again, this isn't something that we necessarily see. We have a colleague that likes to talk about the differences between the UK business environment and the US business environment. And the UK, if a large bank were to go down, we want to think about from a regulatory perspective, from a consumer care perspective, we want to make sure that they have access to what they need access to. And that substitutability item is not a bad word. Whereas in the US, if a large institution were to go offline in whatever variance, then the other competitors are almost smiling, right? And I'm trying to make light of it. We're not all dog eat dog, but at the same time, that sector coordination in terms of a disruption is just typically not there, at least in my experience. So as we move down the slide here, I don't want to drain the slide necessarily, but again, you see the importance of that important business service idea. The foundational elements there, you're going to recognize some of these. Business resilience is that people and process. And I just lost my screen, I'm sorry. is that people and process. The cyber resilience is our security and privacy cybersecurity type mechanisms, third party and vendor, and then technology resilience, which is not just IT disaster recovery. It's also preparing and architecting our environments to prepare for those black swan events as much as we can, but also to lessen the need for a true IT disaster recovery response. And then we'll talk to assurance in a few slides, but the bottom layer there sort of talks about that life cycle with regards to taking a look inward. Sorry about that, Andy. I think I stepped on you.
No, that's okay, Dugan. I was just going to add just the foundational elements, right, are just that. And I think, you know, as we speak with our clients, it's common, it's standard almost to have existing kind of regulatory actions, MRAs and otherwise across a number of these areas, you know, cyber resilience, third party, tech resilience and disaster recovery. Those areas, if you kind of think about the ability to demonstrate that you can recover from an extreme but plausible scenario, you have to have these components in place. So if there is an existing issue with, let's say, vulnerability management or identity management, I'm a security guy by trade, so I tend to default to those. You know, if you've got existing issues, that exposes you to an increased likelihood of one of those extreme but plausible scenarios occurring within your environment. So, you know, while I think probably not the direct responsibility of a resilience program to manage, oversee, and operate these foundational elements, certainly there is a need to understand where there are gaps and what the process is to resolve them.
Oh, I'm sorry, I was on mute. I think we have a polling question coming up next. So the question here, for those of you that may not have live access here, is have your firms defined which business services are the most important, with important in quotation marks. And again, a pretty healthy response here. Partially currently assessing, combined have about 2/3 of the responses. Lots of yeses, so that's great to see. As the professional skeptic on the business continuity side, I always like to understand what important might be defined as within our clients and our different organizations. So, but at the same time, 2/3 answering yes here is pretty impactful. Currently assessing and partially is, you know, this isn't one of those 4-week type efforts. So we completely understand any in-flight efforts there as well, especially for those of you in large, complex global organizations.
Yeah, thanks, Dugan. So if we just stay on that topic of important business service, I think it's promising to hear that folks understand which of those business services are important. Also, I think from a regulatory standpoint, important to note that I think while most folks within financial institutions know what those are, there needs to be a formal process to evaluate and identify those important business services. So, you know, what we've got on slide 12 here is just kind of an overarching view of what the key business services are across the sector in a variety of different spaces. And, you know, this is very different than, you know, Dugan mentioned earlier that the business continuity programs within financial institutions typically have hundreds or likely thousands of business functions. The intent of kind of the very intentional term business services to take that up a level, right? I tend to look at look at this topic as a pyramid where you've got, your business functions, your third parties, your systems and applications, all those as you crawl up the pyramid result in the business services that you provide to your customers at a much more macro level. So when we talk about business services with our clients and based upon the regulatory guidance that we've seen, it's 20 or 30 or 40 business services, not hundreds or thousands. So there's that kind of that right level of depth that you need. Now that doesn't excuse the need to understand front to back what that business service includes in terms of third parties, in terms of discrete business processes, et cetera, that there will be an expectation that you understand what that mapping looks like. But really the important thing to note here, and if we go to slide 13, there's some additional detail here in terms of how you formalize that process. And, first and foremost, if a business service that your organization provides is already, let's say that you're a GSIFI and the regulators have already identified certain business services as critical. They're critical for the purposes, or I should say important for the purposes of operational resilience. However, there is some sort of methodology that needs to be put in place. You'll see some of the criteria here in terms of volume, market share, kind of revenue impact. There's the concept of substitutability, right? If a service that you provide, the sector goes down, is there an ability to kind of transfer that to a competitor or other counterparty to support that going forward? Those are all inputs into what defines an important business service. And again, it's important to note here that this is not necessarily what's important to the organization, but what's important to the broader economy and the customers that it supports. And what we found is that this does not have to be a long exercise. This is not typically an involved effort in and of itself to formalize the process for identifying which business services are important, but there does need to be a process. The work, however, is in that front to back mapping. And while I think a lot of organizations have a good list through their vendor management program of third parties that are critical and a good list of application systems and infrastructure on the technology side that are tier one, that's not viewed or consolidated in the context of these business services. Okay, why don't we go to the next slide here and talk a little bit about impact tolerance. And if there's maybe one aspect of operational resilience that draws the most questions, and I think that many are looking for clearer guidance on, it's this topic of impact tolerance. And you kind of see here on slide 14 some examples of how you establish impact tolerance. For those of you that are familiar with RTO on the business continuity side, some have kind of referred to this as an enhancement or evolution of that thinking. There's an old term that most don't use today, that maximum tolerable duration of disruption, which is I think many are equating to impact tolerance. And when I view it, and Dugan, feel free to jump in here as well, is impact tolerance is not like the point at which it significantly impacts your business operations. It's the point at which a business service being down, right? Trades, settlements, the ability, if you're a retail bank, for your customers to pull money from their account. Impact tolerance isn't the impact to your business, it's the impact to your external stakeholders. Significant impact to the customers that you support and the broader economy overall, to the point at which you as an organization, if you're a retail banker, would consider going out of business because you cannot support your external stakeholders in the way that they expect. Now, there's been a lot of discussion on this topic in terms of how to implement this in a way that makes sense throughout the organization. Again, the impact tolerance is tied to your business services. So to be clear, one of the important one of the reasons that business service exercise is important is because it's drawing some brighter lines around what is frankly in scope for from an operational resilience perspective, because while a certain line of business might be important to you, if it is not important more broadly, then it does not need to go through the rigor that, say, your third-party repo or trading and settlements operations might need to go through specifically. So for the business service, am I impacting the customers more broadly in the economy if it's out for 4 hours, 4 days, 4 months, 4 weeks? What is that right measurement? And what we found is for many, that's what measured in days and weeks and realistic, given the severeness of some of the scenarios that we're talking about. For example, we were speaking with disaster recovery and business continuity folks for a large global institution last year, and brought up the topic of a kind of a bare metal cyber attack, where you have to essentially build a system up from just that, from the hardware on up. You have to reinstall the operating system. You have to find an old version of the application. You have to determine at what point you can revert back to a set of data to continue operations. And the response was from the business continuity individual in the room when we asked him what he would do first was, I would update my resume because he didn't see a path forward, even though the RTO for that related business process might be 4 hours, a path forward that wouldn't take several weeks. And I think a realistic view of how you respond to those types of extreme attacks is what the regulators are looking for. So in that instance, your impact tolerance will blow by whatever your RTO is internally, and you need to then figure out how, if it's 4 weeks before you essentially need to go out of business for whatever that service is, how you recover from certain scenarios there. One of the methods that we have been using to explore impact tolerance is the FAIR methodology. If you're not familiar with the FAIR methodology, that is it's an open source approach to better quantifying IT and security risks. I think as security practitioners, we like to talk about high risk and medium risk and low risk. Well, that tends to lose its meaning when you have several high risk issues that you're trying to delineate. So FAIR is intended to tie dollars and cents to that discussion and say, for this type of attack, right? So a cyber attack or a ransomware attack or something like that. There's a 2% chance that that's a $500,000 event, and a 0.5% chance that that's a $5 million event or $50 million event. You can also tie that to time frame so that you can actually determine what the dollar cost is as a certain event or business service is unavailable or crippled, to determine what the appropriate impact tolerance is. It's been interesting to see some of the back and forth with the regulators and our large clients on this. One of the, I think, inputs on the topic of operational resilience that many are waiting on is some domestic guidance here in the U.S. We had expected the Federal Reserve to publish their thinking on the topic of operational resilience and lay out their expectations from a regulatory perspective going forward. We expected that in July. We're again just given the events of the day, seeing a lot of delays on a lot of things. But at some point in the very near future, believe the FRB will be publishing their own paper on the topic, and that might include a slightly different view of impact tolerance that would help provide some additional clarity to firms trying to figure this out. Dugan, anything to add on that topic from your perspective?
So my mind just now was on a couple of questions that we just came in. So I'm gonna pivot just for a second. I think one of them is germane to this, Andy. So bear with me. The two questions that I've seen come across, and apologies if there are others that I haven't seen yet. But one is this idea, this notion of how it kind of goes back to that op-res business continuity. How is this different, right? And the idea right now is, I think there's a level of, again, that rigor, that empowerment, or excuse me, that enforcement mechanism, which go into this. Business continuity is not new, but it does need to evolve. And one of this, I think one of these evolution challenges we're having right now is, how do we again take ourselves, and I don't mean to make it too simplified, of course, but how do we then again take ourselves out of our organization and look bigger and look broader? And if you and your respective programs already consider that outward impact, this idea of impact tolerance to the broader economy, kudos, and you're staying ahead of it, and you're looking ahead and putting a lot of forethought and some thoughts into what could happen, right? At the same time, though, I think the majority of those people we're talking about, the majority of those questions that we're receiving is, again, how do we make this make sense? And I think, and a comment was made earlier in the presentation regarding it, enhancing and extending practices that already occur. And so I think I'm giving credence to the comments. Yes, it's an evolution. At the same time, it's a much more powerful enforcement mechanism that we need to be dealing with from a compliance perspective. And I think that's important here. Another comment here, and let's go to slide 15 as well here, please, just to change the view. And this will be related, and if we want to get back to some scenarios for the FAIR methodology. But one of the other comments that were made, or questions that were made regarding, was regarding governance, and sort of how does this link, or how does this relate to a COVID 2019 type of enterprise governance? I think from an IT perspective, a little bit outside the perspective of this conversation, but from an IT perspective, I think that handshake from an IT entity, IT organization, all levels of it, back to the business requirements and the needs of this operational resilience discussion, and making that happen, and being the transmission that makes the engine go, I think that's huge. And so I don't have COVID 2019 in front of me right now, but at the same time, I think the concepts are relevant to where we simply need to make sure that we all go forward, marching to the same drummer. And, you can even say, philosophically speaking, you can even say that really relates to that business/IT relationship. As the business goes forward, IT should be right there with them, and vice versa. So happy to provide more detail to that question after today's presentation.
And it's funny, Dugan and I should have a bet on how long it takes before somebody asks about the difference between operational resilience and business continuity, because we get it every time.
I would win.
You would. We made it 40 minutes today before we got that question from the audience, and it's fair. I think in many ways this is an evolution of what business continuity professionals would consider a very mature state, and frankly that not exist in 99% of organizations. I mean, the firms, just to provide perspective, the firms that have mature operational resilience programs today, and there's very few of them. I'm talking, you can count them on your fingers. Have them because they have a very unique business service that they provide, and the regulators have insisted on a level of rigor around those business services. And that results in very senior level first line ownership of resilience at the line of business and business service level. That results in a significant amount of visibility to senior leadership and the board on the topic. And that results in a level of testing and rigor that we don't see at a majority of organizations, to the extent where there's one company in particular that has, I think it's once a month or twice a quarter, something like that, large scale weekend long exercises where they have hundreds of business folks and hundreds of IT folks actively involved in playing out these extreme to plausible scenarios. And you could certainly make an argument that all of that is just an evolution and demonstration of a very mature business continuity program. But that's what we're seeing for evolved and formalized operational resilience programs today. And I don't know that I'll spend more time on the FAIR methodology on slide 15 here, except to say, going back to my prior comments with both important business services and establishing impact tolerances, there will need to be board visibility to what those business services are and how those impact tolerances have been set. Another, I think, interesting statement from the UK consultation papers was that firms needed to be prepared to articulate which types of events would extend them past their defined impact tolerances. So what are the events today, if they were to occur, like perhaps my example of a bare metal scenario is one of them, if there's a significant attack that results in bare metal outcome at a key data center or for a key business service, will that extend beyond impact tolerance? And certainly you can read between the lines there and determine that the regulators are asking because they'll want to know what you are doing as an enterprise to move that within that impact tolerance over time. I thought that that was a very interesting approach from the regulators, and something that firms are going to need to have a story to tell as they evolve their program testing and defined impact tolerances. Dugan, do we want to move on maybe to the kind of the program aspects?
I think so, yes. Sorry about that. I wanted to make sure I was on mute. I think so, yes. My screen on my side is actually frozen on number 14. So let's go ahead and go to 16, please. And Andy, can we overlay real quick another question that's come in recently regarding the applicability of, or the relationship between what we're expecting in the U.S. here domestically versus a couple of comments we've made versus, to the EU and the UK. Can I throw a curveball at you there, Andy?
Yeah, no problem. Certainly what we've seen and heard from our clients and connections is that the domestic regulators, the OCC and the Fed, are already asking questions aligned to what's been laid out within the UK consultation papers. They're asking about business services and impact tolerance. They're asking about front to back mapping and how you get to a clear understanding of what that is. So in a way, I think that the first one out of the gate becomes the de facto standard, and that's what we're seeing so far. Now, all of that said, part of the frustration that I'm sure many on this call can appreciate is the lack of harmonization when it comes to some of the global regulations that companies within the sector need to adhere to. And I fully expect that this will be a similar boat where the regulations will be similar but different. And that's part of the reason that we and many others are eager to see what the FRB paper will look like and how far and where it deviates from the UK guidance. And there is kind of a geographic angle to this that is probably worth highlighting here. You know, the UK regulators are focused on what they're responsible for, and that's for protecting their stakeholders and customers within the UK and the economy of the UK. So while I think that, you know, the expectation will be that these programs are global and enterprise-wide, there is a component that is, all right, and what are the business services that are important in the UK that might be slightly different than the US, that might be slightly different than globally. So there is a wrinkle there. And I wish I had a better answer in terms of how things might differ in the US, but I think time will tell, and you know, stay tuned, because I expect that we should be getting a response or some additional context in the very near future on that topic.
Thanks, Andy. Let's pause for a minute, Andy, and open up the floor to questions from those on the phone. We've been talking here for a little while, so covered a lot of information. So anybody volunteer to be that first? Okay.
Philip or Allie, any other questions that we've missed in the chat? I'm sorry, I'm
this
a
is
little bit
Philip.
hobbled on my Teams right now.
Yeah, this is Philip. So one from Clint. For those of us in a mature regulated program, you're making the point that we are already hitting these ops res guidelines. We just need to do some repacking of our reporting. I think for those without such a mature program, you're seeing this as a way for better acceptance to manage disruption risk.
Yeah, I agree. You know, if your organization is one of the kind of small handful that has some enhanced rigor around business continuity, it probably is not that much of a leap in terms of kind of net new effort, and there is some repackaging involved. Certainly, you know, the self-assessment or reporting component is new and will require some work. For other organizations, it's going to be a heavier lift. You know, we've seen kind of a steady increase over the past 16 or so months in terms of organizations designating or hiring someone into a chief resilience officer role or enterprise resilience lead role or something similar. And a lot of what they're charged with, beyond just kind of building up the governance that you see on slide 16, is really kind of harmonization. I think or what do we call it on here? Enterprise orchestration. Because, you know, if you think about many organizations today, they have relatively mature security functions. They have relatively mature business continuity and DR functions, and they all operate in very decentralized silos. So, when you think about the need to recover from an extreme but plausible scenario, and you know we've now got some lessons learned, good and bad, from the last several months. You know, you see a need for there to be kind of less, maybe more collaboration, both internally and across the sector, to respond appropriately. So you can't have, you know, your disaster recovery folks looking at one playbook and your BCP folks looking at another, and your cyber folks looking at their incident response playbooks. What you need is an enterprise-wide solution. And I think for those that are not as far along, those organizations that are not as far along, that that orchestration across the enterprise is very important. And just to maybe provide one more specific example there, take something like your third-party risk management process, where you're understanding that the security controls are in place today. Well, now you got to ask, all right, is this third party part of a critical business service? And if so, do we have an alternative if that third party can't deliver on their commitment as part of that business service? So kind of that integration with existing programs like third party risk, like disaster recovery is very important in not kind of recreating something that's completely new, but orchestrating the events and activities that occur across a variety of areas today into a single enterprise-wide resilience program going forward.
Andy, we have a follow-up question regarding the scenario that we presented and the weekend testing of a scenario. And the follow-up question came back as, was the company doing those weekend tests in the UK or the US? Do you recall the detail there?
Yeah. Sorry for misunderstanding the question. So yes, those exercises were just that, enterprise-wide, and included individuals in a variety of locations, not just the U.S. and the U.K. And I think another maybe evolution of testing or enhancement or expectation of the regulator isn't just that is a company-wide or enterprise-wide exercises. The company in question also looped in several of their key third parties, market utilities, infrastructure providers, those organizations that are key to delivering those business services should be actively involved in the testing. I think, in a lot of cases, you kind of look at those third parties as a black box and like, oh, let's just make sure that what we can control within our own environment, we have a playbook to address. But that's not the expectation of the regulators, right? They want to see, inclusive of those third parties that you rely upon, how you're able to maintain, sustain, or recover those business services. That's a mind shift. The regulators have stopped short of saying that they're gonna proactively go out to AWS and Azure and some of the key market utilities that aren't financial institutions but are key in supporting them. But they have kind of hinted at it, right? Right now, they're telling organizations that the third parties are your responsibility, and you need to make sure that you're comfortable in their ability to respond and recover to extremely plausible scenarios to the event that they support those business services. So enterprise-wide, global, and inclusive of third parties, and a variety of different scenarios is how I would sum up the kind of the testing guidance that we've seen, and where we've seen more mature examples of it.
Andy, that term you just used, mind shift, is an excellent term. So let's go to slide 17, please. And let's sort of think about where the rubber hits the road in this program. So first line, second line, we've seen a lot of trending right now, or excuse me, some traction. I won't say a lot yet, but some organizations are coming to us, large organizations, saying, where does this off-res function sort of sit? If it's not simple or relevant for this organization to put a resilience program sort of on top of the BCM program and the DR program and that multifaceted enterprise sort of posture, then a lot of the traction we've seen lately is sort of this 1.5, this line of defense of 1.5, where there needs to be this happy understanding and this culture shift, going back to the mind shift comment made, this culture shift between what does that risk management look like, that governance strategy look like as we fold in some of this resilience, scale, and rigor into what we hope is already mature within the organization. I think as a former practitioner, my focus is always on that first line. Where does this make the most impact from an operations, from a culture, from a change management perspective? And so that being connected to the business units is important. And I think that business units, though, should encapsulate the technology teams, should encapsulate the information security teams, the third-party and vendor risk management teams as well. So when I think of that 1.5 line of defense, that's sort of where I really see a lot of value. Andy, any thoughts regarding that?
I just reinforced a comment earlier that where we've seen kind of mature resilience programs, we are seeing heavy first line involvement at more senior levels. Not to overgeneralize, but in some cases that, if there are business continuity representatives across lines of business, sometimes they're buried in doing that job off the corner of their desk. For important business services, lines of business that support important business services, we've seen heavy dedicated responsibilities from more senior line of business leadership. And I think that is important in truly understanding that business service, how it operates, and how to recover from a variety of scenarios. I think that's a very important component.
Andy, it's almost like we've done this before. That's a great segue into slide number 18. So let's go into sort of this idea of integrated testing and improving self-assessment, call it continuous improvement or maintenance type activities. So I think the key here is with the addition of the rigor, with the addition or the shift of focus to important business services versus a business process. This idea of enterprise orchestration, this idea of bringing in third parties in a much more disciplined approach than the BCM industry has had in the past, really goes into this testing idea, right? And so I think just the sheer complexity changes is what the key takeaway here is. So designing the scenario to simulate that extreme but plausible. Many of you in business continuity, we have been known as the sky is falling and the alarmists throughout our careers. So, when we think about, the DC-10 chopping off the top floor of my office building because it's in a flight path of the local Air Force base, it gets a lot of eye rolls. But for those of us in the industry, it's like, oh, hey, that's kind of cool. How can I apply that, right? So this designing of the scenario of an extreme but plausible event, regardless of where within our operations, I think is important. I think understanding how the KPIs and KRIs of the testing and how they're going to shift with the shift in focus is conceptually direct, but in practice, I don't believe it's that simple, and I have not seen evidence that it's a simple process yet. Conducting of the test, again, lots more players, lots more injects. Maybe your 3-hour tabletop becomes a 2 or 3 day tabletop to ensure that appropriate stakeholders and their underlying processes and capabilities and plans go through that validation step as well. And then, of course, we understand that if we can't measure it and we don't take action, then we're not going to improve, right? So implementing those lessons learned, again, the idea of the complexity being added to the testing should result in quite a few lessons learned at all levels and across the organization. So the coordination and the attention paid to putting those actions in place, making the appropriate documentation changes, changing maybe some governance ideas, some BIA type of ideas, et cetera. Again, I think it's a direct concept, but at the same time, putting it in practice will take some time. Andy, any comments on slide 18? If not, I think we're going into our last poll or another poll question.
Let's jump into the poll.
So the question here, for those that may not see, is how would you describe the current state of operational resilience at your firm? And I'd like to add a caveat here. Based on how we've defined operational resilience, right? So the rigor, some of the nods toward the compliance, the enterprise orchestration, true engagement from third parties. Be interested in these results. And it appears, unfortunately, Ali, Jordan, I am frozen on slide 16.
I can actually see the results this time. So we've got 53% that have plans in place, small percentage, 5% where it's not been discussed, and then 42% resilience is covered through existing activities, which is great. And I think generally consistent with what we're seeing across the industry, with an eye towards how companies continue to evolve this, and certainly some are taking a bit of a wait and see attitude before getting too formal, just based upon what the final regulations will look like around the globe. So why don't we
Andy,
go
I think I'm handing it. Yep.
Yeah. Why don't we go to the next slide here? We have seen several organizations now where the third line has put some attention towards operational resilience, and I know we're in the process of conducting a couple operational resilience audits. And at a point where a lot of companies are now looking at their 2021 audit plan, and this is a pretty consistent line item on next year's plan as well. There are a few different approaches that are being taken. One is kind of understanding the governance around it. And again, this is kind of early on, and a lot of firms are maybe more so focused on the plans, design and build plans for their resilience program going forward, and how they're going to take what they're already doing today and harmonize it, orchestrate it into a program that demonstrates their ability to respond to extremely plausible events in a way that aligns with regulatory expectations. We've also seen some firms take more of a business service focus, right, where online banking or maybe retail banking is identified as an important business service, and they're digging in deep, not on the governance of the overall program, but on that specific business service, right? How confident is the business in that front to back mapping? What are the key controls in place that mitigate the impact of those extremely plausible scenarios? And what are just kind of running through even a few different types of events, right? The scenario testing specific to that business service, and the ability to stay within impact tolerance. So a few different views there. Of course, that there's integration and touch points across almost any IT and business audit. They should be asking the questions in terms of, is this business service critical? Does this infrastructure support an important business service? So there's kind of integration with existing practices, but we are seeing a kind of a lean towards specific and standalone resilience audits as well. We maybe just kind of one more topic here. I know we've got one more question after this, but you know what? It's been interesting as the events of the last several months have unfolded. You know, I know, like I, like many others, are looking for silver linings in what's going on around us with COVID. And I think one of the positive takeaways is, you know, that with some exceptions from a financial sector standpoint, there's been limited impact to the business services provided to customers in a time that's been very volatile, right? And dynamic in terms of market activity. And certainly, you know, firms needed to quickly change how they operated, moving to a remote workforce model in a way that frankly a lot of organizations didn't plan for in their existing business continuity plans, right? They may have considered, you know, 60 or 70% remote, but not, you know, closer to 100, which is what many organizations saw. And I think that there's a lot of positives from that. That shows the firm's ability to withstand the shocks of a global event and with limited impact to those business services. However, I think we've gotten a healthy dose of kind of caution of getting too confident in the resilience of those business services based purely on this specific event. A couple months ago, we had a kind of a roundtable with several senior resilience leaders around the globe. And then Paul Williams joined us. Paul Williams is with the Bank of England, the regulatory body in the UK. And he's really been the thought leader from a UK regulator perspective on the topic. And what he cautioned was, just because there was a healthy response to this extreme but plausible scenario, should not necessarily give comfort in the sectors or the individual organizations' ability to respond and recover to other scenarios. This was, I think the word he used was a very symmetric event in that it kind of was broad reaching and consistent across the industry. And, you know, it was, while it was sudden that the remote workforce occurred, it was not completely out of nowhere and catching individuals off guard. So when you think about, for instance, a ransomware attack like the example I mentioned at the beginning, for those runners and bikers in the group, Garmin, I was at my folks' house over the weekend, and he was complaining that his Garmin watch wasn't working. Turns out they've been hit hard with ransomware, and as of, I think, Tuesday, we're down for 5 days or something due to a large-scale ransomware incident as well. So, you know, that's an asymmetric event, right? It comes out of nowhere. It impacts a single organization. And while I think that there are a lot of lessons learned from the COVID response, it just reinforces the need to explore other scenarios and how that playbook, right, that the response and recovery would need to differ. And I think reinforces the need for very rigorous testing of a variety of scenarios to really start to get comfortable in terms of where we go from here. Didn't really want to focus too much on COVID unless there are specific questions, because I know that that's a topic that everybody is talking about all the time. But certainly if there are questions on that, happy to address it in the last 10 or so minutes that we have here. And with that, why don't we go to, we've got one more poll for the group on slide 21. Which channel do you think is the best way to incorporate operational resilience into the third line at your firm? I mentioned the standalone resilience audit, the foundational audits, which is kind of a review of business continuity, disaster recovery, et cetera, integration into all audits, or all of the above? I'm not seeing results on my screen. I'm not sure if others are.
Yeah, so this is Philip. So we'll see. Some answers are coming through still, so give us another second. So we're about 20%, a little over that. 20% on standalone audit, 10% on foundational audit, 20% on integration into all standards, business and IT audits, and then D, 50% all of the above.
Got it. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how this evolves. I mean, certainly what we've been encouraging is how you can get coverage and comfort in the existing audit plans, aside from anything specifically focused. So all the above seems like the right answer in my book. Okay, so
this is a very common. I'm sorry, Andy. This is a very common question coming to us regularly as well. So take what you will from these results here, but this idea of sort of an integrated approach, the all of the above approach, if you will, just because of the size and broad, the scale and the broadness of OpRes just kind of makes sense that it can be tackled from a number of directions from an assurance perspective.
Thanks, Dugan. So we've got kind of a final thoughts slide here, and frankly I think we've kind of hit on all these already. There's some net new topics like formalizing your important business services and impact tolerances that I think firms will need to kind of specifically focus on in terms of building upon what they already do today in terms of continuity, cyber, et cetera. And then finally, and I think we're going to see more focus on this going forward is really an increased rigor on testing, the testing program for extreme but plausible scenarios at the enterprise level, consistent with some of the comments I made earlier. And then finally, if this is not, if business continuity is not a consistent agenda item with senior leadership and the board today, it likely will be, in the coming years. We early on in the discussion, there was a very senior leader at one of the largest organizations within the sector globally, and he said that he believed that operational resilience would be one of the top 3 compliance-related topics for the next 5 years, just to give some context to where the priority is, both from the regulatory perspective, where we've seen the OCC, PRA, FCA, others highlight this as kind of in their top 5 for the year. And then, the kind of the industry agreement on the priority here. So a lot more attention, I think, will be given on this in the coming months and years. Dugan, any other comments from your end?
My primary takeaway for many of these conversations is just, again, from that, where the rubber hits the road. What does this mean? I would just recommend really start putting thought into what this resilience discussion means for what you already have intact, and then just give it some good diligence, right? A lot of the comments and questions that I've gotten, and I make that comment for a reason. A lot of comments and questions that I've gotten are almost waving their hand at this because, well, we have a continuity program intact, and and that type of a messaging, right? So I would just caution that, especially for the complex, especially for the financial services, for obvious reasons, just really give it some good thoughts. See where you can improve, where we can all improve in our own organizations, whether it's knocking down silos or improving the maturity in one area that can become the stone in our shoe as we hike the mountain going forward. Let's just bring everything up and rising tide type of concept, right? So. Andy, I think we've got one more open-ended poll in 2 or 3 slides. How do we get to that?
Sure. So first and foremost, there's some thought leadership here, but maybe just a final comment for the group. Other topics of interest, either kind of related to this or unrelated to this for this audience, certainly interested in kind of what topics there are. And if you, of course, you are interested in some additional discussions, have questions that didn't get answered around operational resilience, we're happy to connect offline and answer any additional questions. All right, so it looks like we're getting some comments here in resulting in this cool looking word cloud. If I'm interpreting some of this, it looks like there's some questions on the various lines of defense and the kind of the approach to that. So certainly we'll share this with Mike and the CORA crew as fodder for additional topics going forward to help drive some additional discussion. I see one more question here that I'll take a shot at, and then maybe I'll hand it out to Philip and/or Mike for any closing thoughts. What role do you see RCSA playing in operational resilience, risk and control self-assessments? I think generally speaking, we have not seen control frameworks and corresponding control self-assessments include all of the controls that are important in responding to extreme but plausible events. I think certainly those that result in security issues and operational incidents, and going back to Sarbanes-Oxley, focused on the controls around financial systems, yes. But I think, and what we're recommending and assisting some of our clients with is taking a look at that existing framework and making sure that the controls in place and tested through the RCSAs include, those that protect, monitor for, and help respond and recover to not just any event that might cause an operational issue or a security issue, but those tail risks, those extreme but plausible scenarios, which may not have been a key consideration when those frameworks were developed. So I certainly think there's overlap there. And just like broader information risk management programs, RCSAs are an important program with which to monitor and make sure that the controls that help protect are in place and, of course, operating effectively. So I hope that that's helpful. And that's a great question. Certainly appreciate it. Philip or Mike, any, and again, thank you all. I know everybody's busy, for taking an hour and a half out of your day to listen to the topic. I enjoyed it. I thought the questions were great, and appreciate the opportunity to talk today. With that, I'll hand off to Philip and Mike, or Mike.
So Andy, Dugan, Philip, Allie, thank you so much. I think the information was great. And Philip, I will circle back with you like we normally do, just to catch up. But I wanted to thank our CORA audience. I wanted to thank Protiviti. I think this was great. I think there's more to come on this. And Philip, I don't know if there's anything you wanted to add as a final thought.
No, thank you very much for joining us today. I know there was one last question with Sonal that Andy just answered related to the platforms used, and those are Fusion. So if you have any other questions, feel free to reach out to us. We'll send out an email with some additional thought leadership and our contact information so that you have it for everyone on the team. So thank you again.
Thank you, guys. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you all.